Hello, welcome back to Talking Europe on France 24, still at the European Parliament in Brussels. Now today for our interview I'm meeting Udo Bullmann, who's the new leader of the Progressive Alliance of Socialists and Democrats group in the European Parliament. The S&D, as it's more commonly known, actually won the highest share of the popular vote in the 2014 parliamentary election with 40.2 million votes. But due to the way that the EU's voting system is weighted, the S&D actually ended up with only the second largest number of seats in the Parliament. Udo Bullmann himself has been an MEP for almost 20 years, hails from Frankfurt in Germany, and has just become the latest in a string of German nationals, therefore, to take up high-ranking jobs within the EU. Welcome to the programme, Udo Bullmann.
Hello, everybody.
Nice to meet you. First question, as I mentioned, you're heading the second biggest political group in Parliament in terms of seats, at a time when the centre-right, the right, the far-right are doing particularly well across Europe in national elections, including Germany, France, Italy and more. So as the new leader of the Socialists and Democrats, what would be your aims, what are your messages to Europe and its citizens at this time?
I'm full of confidence that we can come back to our full strength. We are living in exciting times full of challenges, very complex challenges. Income distribution is a huge problem all over Europe. Growing inequalities, we have climate change, we have migration challenges. Social Democrats can provide the right answers if we go back to people, if we redefine what we believe in and put it in a modern version, in a modern system of communication, and stay strong with the people, with our neighborhoods, with our constituencies. We are already in this process of renovating our messages, renovating our policy approaches, looking at the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, for example, as an orientation of what we are doing in a very holistic approach. So we will come back.
OK, well, that's all very positive. One of your leadership campaign promises, I know, was to bring social democracy back to full strength. Next year, however, you will be actually losing straight away 20 MEPs, those being the British Labour Party MEPs, who will no longer be European citizens. What's more, there is that Euroscepticism that we mentioned. There are challenges, aren't there?
This is a catastrophe, especially for the United Kingdom, because I would have liked to see the UK in, of course. I have excellent colleagues from the UK, committed, passionate colleagues delivering on Europe in excellent work. So let's wait and see what is going to happen in the UK. Perhaps the last word has not yet been spoken on that. But of course, we have to invest ourselves in Scandinavia, to get our feet on the ground again in France. We are strong in Portugal, defend Italy, Spain, Germany, of course. We got into this grand coalition again. Most of arguments were because of European responsibility. But I can foresee that we are fighting back, and I'm again full of confidence.
All right, well, we might come back to some of those individual national concerns a bit later on, but I'd like to move on to something that we've been hearing about just in the last few days. We've had some big announcements on the next EU budget, the plans for it. Now, this is going to be covering the next 7 years from 2020 onwards. We've actually prepared a report. We can take a look at some of the main announcements. This from Alexander Orcott at France 24.
Rather than cutting costs as the EU loses a key contributor, the European Commission President has announced an even bigger budget for the 7 years after Brexit.
Our proposal for a multi-annual financial framework for the period from 2021 to 2027 lead to an overall amount of 1.279 trillion euros.
The €279 billion increase comes despite Britain's departure, leaving a €15 billion hole in its accounts. Jean-Claude Juncker says more money is needed to pay for ambitious projects that will further unify the remaining 27 member states. So how will the EU balance its books? The Commission has called on members to contribute an increased percentage of their annual GDP. Several countries are preparing to fight the hike, but the biggest net contributors, France and Germany, have already said they are ready to pay. Taxes on carbon emissions, plastic waste and corporations could also contribute roughly 12% of the budget. Meanwhile, Jean-Claude Juncker announced a controversial new measure that would see the EU cut funding for member states that breach the rule of law.
Respect for the rule of law is an essential prerequisite for sound financial management and the effective implementation of the budget.
Poland and Hungary, who are at odds with Brussels over their migration policy, have criticised this as an attempt to punish them. Cuts in several other areas are also set to meet fierce resistance. French farmers have already spoken out against a 5% reduction of the common agricultural policy, the largest single area of EU spending. The Commission says it wants to focus instead on funding the digital economy, research, defence and border protection.
There we go, plenty to take in there with all those announcements on the proposals for the next European budget. Huge sums of money as well. And Udo Bullmann, this is a bigger budget, more money going into it, even though the EU is losing a member state. Is that reasonable?
The task is not easy, but you have to look at what the member states ask for. The member states ask for new tasks in Europe, on the migration challenge, asking for new tasks on defense, asking for new tasks, rightly for young people, to open Europe for young people, going to other countries for their studies, going for other countries for their education. So somehow has these tasks also to be financed, and you cannot put more and more burden on the European Union without financing these tasks. And this is the old dilemma, that the same people who permanently ask for more Europe here and there then ask for less money. So the Commission has done a first step. We Socialists and Democrats, Social Democrats would see even a more clear handwriting on transformation, because if we are in this complex situation of challenges, more sustainability, you can cut at several edges. Well, if you talk about farming, for instance, yes, family farming, down-to-earth practices, healthy nutrition, that has to be financed. But do we need the big industries? That is a question mark. So you can shift, but you have to give the budget a modern profile. And this modern profile has to have something to do with sustainability.
Well, and in terms of who gets to decide where the money is spent, that's quite interesting as well. I know that your home country, Germany, is one member that has said it's willing to pay more, up to 10 billion euros a year more, according to the foreign and finance ministers. If Germany, as the biggest member state by population and economy, is also paying more, does that mean Germany is going to be looking to have a bigger say in where the money gets spent?
Well, first of all, we have to realize in all member states, but also in Germany especially, that we are main profiteers from the internal market. The German economy is that strong, the German industry is that strong, has something to do with the big internal market of close to 500 million people. Somehow we have to finance the perspectives of tomorrow. Otherwise, we will face a decline of our economy, not only in Germany, but all over the Eurozone and the European Union. So we have to be, Willy Brandt once said that, a nation of good neighbors. We do not need to dominate the European Union, but we should invest ourselves into the Europe.
In many of the member states, I'm thinking of Greece, Cyprus, it is an image of a country that wants to dominate, wants to take what it can get out of Europe and drive this project where it wants to go.
Well,
that's something I've heard out in the member states.
Yeah, well, it depends. I hear many voices from all party families who say the problem with you is not that you have a huge economy. The problem with you is not that you have a stable political system. The problem with you is that you are dominant, and that was the past of Merkel governments, that you try to be dominant without giving real guidance and practical support for positive solutions. This is the problem. And here, that was one of the reasons why my party, Social Democrats, entered into, again, this growing coalition. Nobody likes it really, but we did it because of European responsibility to support Europe and to support also our neighbors for a joint positive future.
All right, well, another detail that's jumped out in the budget proposals, a proposal for a new mechanism to, and I quote, suspend, reduce or restrict access to EU funding. to member states that are deemed not to be respecting the rule of law. This very much seen as targeting Hungary, Poland, where Brussels has flagged up many times issues regarding rule of law. Now, is this mechanism a good idea to keep member states all on the same page, following the same rules, or could it perhaps be a really great way to deepen existing splits within the European Union?
First of all, to implement the rule of law and to follow the treaty is an obligation for every country. And this is not a multiple choice, whether you do or whether you do not. So every country has to be a country that is implementing our legal acts on which we have agreed upon. And if we as the European Parliament insist on that, this is not a kind of punishment. We are protecting the people in these countries. So we are the house of the people. We are the house of democracy in the European Parliament, and we have to protect the people, also the people in Hungary, also the people in Poland. And their governments should reflect on the fact that this is not an easy take to say, on the one hand, we would like to receive the money. On the other hand, we are not interested in common obligations. This is a difficult stance.
I was in Hungary a couple of weeks ago. I asked the government spokesman if the country does want to stay within the European Union, because there have been so many clashes. He said yes. Is that what you see, though, from countries that are consistently clashing with Europe on issues as fundamental as rule of law?
I would encourage the colleagues from the conservative PPE to talk to Mr. Orban, and not only to support him in his questionable campaigns against foreigners, against refugees. They should have a serious talk. How can you have somebody in your party family who is permanently trying to polarize the society against foreigners and refugees which actually are not there? So this is kind of craziness that has to be stopped.
Let's move on to talk about the future of Europe more broadly. Emmanuel Macron, the French president, was in Strasbourg just a couple of weeks ago talking about his vision of the future of Europe. He's very much presented himself as being possibly the most pro-European of all the European leaders. He's talking about launching his own group, his own political group for next year's elections. There is scepticism about this now, but he made En Marche, France's biggest political party, by seats in just over 1 year in terms of the National Assembly. Do you believe that he could upend European politics as well?
Well, I told him when he came to Strasbourg in my response, we welcome him. We are happy that he did win in France against the right-wing populists.
It was at the expense of the Socialist Party, though, which would be your natural partner.
It was a polarization, pro-European against anti-European. That was dividing the society very obviously. So in principle, I think we need more European leaders being that outspoken for the future of Europe. On the other hand, I see him at the crossroads. This is what I told him as well. I see him at the crossroads. He's giving excellent speeches about the future of Europe, but he has a gap in delivering on that. So I asked him, why is France opposing social legislation for young mothers to come back to their profession? Why are they in council opposing the work-life balance package? This is the technical explanation for that. Doesn't fit with his general Sunday speeches. So he has to do his homework also in the practical things. Then he can be an ally. But if he is only talking Europe and doing something else, we will have problems with him.
Of course, France has long gone hand in hand with Germany when it comes to Europe, two founder members, as we know. However, there is talk currently that relations between President Macron and Chancellor Merkel are at a low ebb. How concerned do you think we should be about this, this Franco-German couple perhaps taking a little time out? Or is it perhaps welcome that there's perhaps a little less Franco-German dominance?
What we never should think of is the exclusiveness of an arrangement between the bilaterals of two countries. So if Paris and Berlin have a positive relationship, everybody can profit from that. But the two capitals should never think that this is an exclusive means to dominate the European Union, excluding others. Yes, there is room for improvement. That is on the French side, especially the liberal friends of Mr. Macron have a zero understanding of what Europe needs. And within the conservative parties, we see a deep split. We could convince Chancellor Merkel for getting to a pro-European stance in our coalition agreement, but she has major problems to make clear to her political party and the colleagues of her in the German Bundestag that we cannot defend a standstill policy when it comes to Eurozone, for example.
Just coming back then to Germany, you mentioned about the SPD, your home party, being in this perhaps slightly reluctant coalition, grand coalition currently. The SPD seems to have perhaps suffered from being in grand coalition with Angela Merkel's CDU-CSU alliance, very much blamed for quite a lot of things that have gone wrong in Germany. Certainly the erosion of some social protections as well, going back to Schröder's time with the Hartz IV reforms. Can the SPD fix this situation?
I think so, yes. We now have been starting with a new leadership, with outspoken people who say we are in favor of social justice, we are going to repair the deficits of the past. Nationally, though, it was the worst vote share in the post-war era back at the end of last year. We have to learn from that, and we are already started with that.
Well, just one final quick question. As I mentioned in the introduction, you are one of several Germans in a leading post in European institutions. There is a lot of comment on this in France in particular, some people saying Germans holding a little bit too much sway in Europe. What's your response to that?
If people ask me on that, then I say normally, well, indeed, there are some 80 million Germans around in Europe. And I would advise not only to select the conservatives of them, so sometimes also pick a progressive.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Udo Bullmann, and best of luck in your new job as head of the Socialists and Democrats here in the European Parliament.
Thanks very much to you.
Thank you. And thanks very much to you for watching. We'll see you next time here on Talking Europe on France 24.
Join France 24 on the red carpet in Cannes.